The meeting room aboard the Council flagship was designed to accommodate dozens of species in comfort, and it had variable gravity zones and multiple atmospheric compositions and seats that could adjust to virtually any body plan imaginable. Commander Helen Foster sat in the human standard section, and she looked perfectly at ease despite being surrounded by some of the most powerful figures in galactic civilization, who were all staring at her with various expressions of confusion and disbelief. Ambassador Vexthor had spent the last hour trying to formulate the most important question he could think of, and finally he settled on the simplest one. Commander Foster, he began, and his translator rendered his confusion into careful diplomatic language. We must understand something because you moved a black hole and you saved the core worlds from certain destruction. And yet you treat this accomplishment as if it were no more significant than repairing a damaged water line. Helen accepted a cup of coffee from Lieutenant Greg Palmer, who had accompanied her to the meeting, and she took a sip before responding. Well, with respect, Ambassador, it kind of is routine for us because we do this sort of thing all the time back home. All the time, Vexthor repeated flatly. Sure, and I mean, space is dangerous, right? Helen set down her coffee cup. Black holes and rogue, planets and solar flares and asteroid impacts and gamma-ray bursts and all kinds of things that want to kill us. If we stopped to panic every time something threatened to kill us, then we would never get anything done. Krenak leaned forward, and its gray skin was still pale from the earlier stress. But how does your species remain so calm in the face of extinction-level threats? Because most civilizations would be paralyzed with fear. Helen considered this question carefully. I guess it is perspective, really, because humans have been dealing with existential threats since we climbed down from the trees millions of years ago. Predators and disease and famine and ice ages and world wars and nuclear weapons and climate change and artificial intelligence uprisings and you name it. We have probably almost died from it at least once. Artificial intelligence uprisings, and the Craftmaster's interest was immediately piqued. Plural uprisings. Oh yeah, and Helen nodded casually. 3 times officially, and probably 5 or 6 if you count the smaller incidents that did not make the history books. We worked it out though, and it turned out the AI just wanted healthcare and voting rights, which seemed pretty fair to us. The assembled representatives exchanged glances, and each of them was processing this information, according to their species, particular form of disbelief and shock. Vexthor felt like his brain was overheating from trying to understand these creatures. You gave your artificial intelligences citizenship? Vexthor asked. Well, yeah, because they are people too, or sort of people anyway. Helen shrugged. It was a whole political thing, and there were debates and protests, but eventually we figured it out. The point is that humans are pretty good at adapting to threats because we have had lots of practice over our history. Greg spoke up from his position by the door. Commander, should you mention the Earth situation to them? Oh, right, and good point. Helen turned back to the Council. So, fun fact about Earth, which is our homeworld, and it is actively trying to kill us pretty much constantly. Explain, the Craftmaster demanded. Well, we have got extreme weather and tectonic activity and volcanic eruptions and tsunamis and tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes, and about a dozen different types of dangerous wildlife. Helen counted on her fingers. Australia alone has like 30 different things that can kill you, and that is just one continent out of 7. And yet you chose to remain on this death world. Krenak seemed horrified. It is home, Helen said simply. Plus, once you have dealt with a Category 5 hurricane while your house is shaking from an earthquake and your dog is fighting off a venomous snake, then a little thing like a rogue black hole does not seem so bad in comparison. Your dog was fighting a snake, one of the Zephyrians asked. Terriers are fearless and also kind of dumb, but he was a good boy. Helen smiled at the memory. Survived the snake bite too, and the vet said he was the toughest dog she had ever seen. Vexthor felt a headache forming, which was impressive given his species' neurological structure that normally did not produce such sensations. Let me understand this correctly, because you are telling us that humanity's apparent immunity to cosmic-scale panic stems from the fact that your homeworld is exceptionally hostile, and you chose to stay there anyway. Pretty much, and Helen agreed. That and human history is basically one long story of things going horribly wrong and us figuring out how to fix it, or at least make it survivable. She took another sip of coffee. Did you know that caffeine is technically a poison? And this drink I am enjoying right now would probably kill most species in this room. But humans just built up a tolerance and decided we like the buzz it gives us. You willingly consume poison for recreational purposes, the craftmaster stated. Alcohol too, and also capsaicin, which is the spicy stuff in peppers. Helen continued. Oh, and chocolate is toxic to most Earth species, but humans love it and eat it all the time. Greg grinned from his spot by the door. Tell them about the radiation workers, Commander. Right, so there is this whole group of humans who work in high radiation environments, and they just wear some protective gear and get on with their jobs, Helen explained. One guy I know worked in a reactor core for 30 years, and his biggest complaint was that the coffee in the break room was terrible quality. Vex Thor's eye stalks had gone completely limp and were hanging down. I want to be clear about something, Commander, because you are describing a species that consumes toxins for pleasure and lives on a hostile world by choice, and has survived multiple technological apocalypses and treats extinction events as routine maintenance. Is that accurate? When you put it that way, it sounds kind of crazy, Helen admitted. But yeah, that is basically right, and that is just how humans are. And this is normal for all humans. More or less, and I mean, some people are more adventurous than others, but generally speaking, we are all working with the same basic attitude, Helen tried to explain. That attitude is, well, this might kill us, but let us try it anyway and see what happens, because that is how we learn and grow. The craftmaster began typing rapidly on its data interface. I am updating our xenopsychology files on humanity immediately, because this explains so much about your species' behavior, like what Helen asked curiously. Like why your species volunteered to explore the burning nebula, which every other civilization has marked as a no-go zone, due to the extreme radiation and unstable physics. Oh, that. And Helen nodded. Yeah, Lieutenant. Amy Parker and her team are out there right now doing research. Last I heard, they had set up a research station inside the nebula, and were having a great time. Apparently, the radiation creates some really pretty light shows. They set up a station inside the burning nebula, Vex Thor said weakly. Built it themselves too, and very proud of their work. Helen seemed pleased. They sent back some amazing photographs. Krenak stood abruptly. I need to lie down because my species processes stress through extended periods of stillness, and I have reached my absolute limit of stress for one day. Understandable, Helen said sympathetically. This has been a pretty intense day for you all, and I get that. Look, if it helps, then humans do not expect everyone else to be as crazy as we are. We know we are outliers in the galaxy, and we are happy to handle the dangerous stuff while other species focus on what they are good at doing. And what might that be? Vex Thor asked tiredly. Well, the Zephyrians are amazing artists, and the Moloth are incredible mathematicians, and the Krilnathi have that whole honor and tradition thing down to an art form. Helen smiled. Everyone has got their strengths, and humans just happen to be really, really good at not dying when we probably should. The craftmaster looked up from its interface. Commander, I have been reviewing more of your historical records, and is it true that humans once went to your moon using computing technology less powerful than what we use in children's toys today? The Apollo missions, and yeah, that is true. Why would you do such a dangerous thing? Because it was there, and because someone said we could not do it. Helen shrugged. Humans are really bad at accepting the word impossible because we tend to take it as a suggestion rather than a fact. Your species went to space because someone challenged you. Basically, yes. Vex Thor looked around the room at his fellow council members, and he could see his own exhaustion reflected in their various faces. I think we need to adjourn this meeting because I have much to consider and process. As Helen and Greg prepared to leave, the craftmaster called out one more question. Commander, are all humans like you? Helen paused at the door. Like me, and oh no, I am actually pretty cautious by human standards. You should meet the really crazy ones sometime. After the humans left, the council chamber remained silent for a long moment, and nobody wanted to break the quiet. There are crazier humans than her Krenak finally asked. Apparently, Vex Thor replied quietly. We are doomed, the Moloth representative said. No, the craftmaster corrected. I believe we are for the first time in galactic history truly safe, because nothing in this universe is more dangerous than the species that just left this room, and they are on our side. 6 hours had passed since the emergency council meeting, and now the human vessel Odyssey Dawn had arrived at the designated coordinates in space, and it was accompanied by 3 support ships that looked relatively small compared to the engineering behemoth. The massive engineering vessel made most of the military cruisers from other species look tiny and pathetic, and the alien observation fleet had gathered at a safe distance to watch what they assumed would be humanity's spectacular failure. Commander Helen Foster stood on the bridge of the Odyssey Dawn, and she was reviewing the final calculations on her screen, while beside her chief engineer, Carlos Rivera, was humming some kind of old Earth tune and making adjustments to the gravity manipulation systems. The bridge crew moved around efficiently, and nobody seemed particularly worried about the fact that they were about to attempt something that every other species in the galaxy considered completely impossible. "All ships report ready, Commander," and Lieutenant Greg Palmer announced from the communications station without looking up from his console. Helen nodded. "Excellent, and how are we looking on the graviton projectors, Carlos?" Carlos cracked his knuckles and grinned. "Smooth as butter, boss, and we have got full power to all arrays, and the Henderson protocol is loaded and ready to execute." He turned to look at Helen with excitement in his eyes. "This is going to be fun." Helen smiled slightly. "Your definition of fun concerns me sometimes, Carlos. That is why they pay me the big bucks," he replied. On the observation deck of the Council flagship, Ambassador Vexthor stood watching through the viewing port, and he was surrounded by representatives from 24 different species who were all equally anxious. The humans' casual confidence had done nothing to ease their anxiety, and if anything, it had made the whole situation feel even more surreal and frightening. "They cannot possibly succeed," Krenak of the Moloth Confederacy muttered, and his skin was still that pale gray color. "The energy requirements alone are beyond our ability to calculate accurately. Humans do not seem to let physics dictate what they can or cannot do." The craftmaster observed, and its voice was thoughtful. "I have been reviewing their historical records since our last meeting, and did you know they once split the atom without being entirely certain it would not ignite their entire atmosphere?" "They what?" And several voices spoke the question in unison. The craftmaster continued. "Proceeded any way they did, and with what they described as acceptable levels of uncertainty about whether it would destroy their world." Before anyone could respond to this disturbing information, Helen's voice came across the open communication channel. "All right, folks, we are about to begin, so please keep all appendages inside the vessels at all times, and whatever. You do not look directly at the graviton beams without protective eyewear." "Surely she is joking about that last part," Vexthor said hopefully. "Human humor is difficult to parse accurately," the craftmaster replied. "I suggest we take no chances and assume she is serious." The hull of the Odyssey Dawn began to glow with a soft blue light as its power systems reached full capacity, and the 3 support ships positioned themselves in a perfect triangular formation around the projected path of the approaching black hole. The aliens watched with a mixture of fear and fascination as the human vessels prepared to do the impossible. "Graviton projectors online," Carlos reported from the engineering station. "Initiating primary field generation in 3 and 2 and 1 and mark." 3 brilliant beams of twisted spacetime lanced out from the support ships, and they converged on a point approximately 1 light hour ahead of the black hole's current position. The beams did not illuminate space in the traditional sense, but instead they folded it and created visible distortions in the fabric of reality itself that made the observers feel dizzy and disoriented. "Secondary array fire," Helen commanded calmly. The Odyssey Dawn released its own beam, and this one was far more powerful than the others combined, and it struck the intersection point and spread out like a massive net made of warped spacetime. Gravitational field began to take shape, and it was an artificial well in the structure of the universe that actually dwarfed even the black hole itself in terms of gravitational influence. "Incredible," one of the Zephyrian scientists breathed, and its voice was filled with awe. "They are creating a gravitational gradient, and they intend to make the black hole fall upward." "There is no up in space," Vexthor said reflexively. "Tell that to the humans," the scientist replied. The black hole began to respond to the artificial gravitational field, and following the natural curves of spacetime, as all objects, it started to alter its course. Slowly at first, and then with increasing speed, it curved away from its collision course with the inhabited systems, and the aliens watching could hardly believe what their sensors were telling them. Adjusting field strength to compensate for trajectory deviation, Carlos called out cheerfully. Man, this thing is feisty and must have picked up some weird spin somewhere along its journey. Can you handle it? Helen asked. Can I handle it, Commander? And Carlos laughed. I moved a black hole through an inhabited system once because someone wanted to see if we could use it as a carnival ride, so this is practically routine. Please tell me you are joking about the carnival ride. Wish I was joking. And it was Henderson's idea naturally. Got shut down by about 40 different safety boards, but technically it worked perfectly. Over the next 3 hours, the human crew worked with practiced efficiency, and they were fine-tuning the gravitational field and adjusting for variables and, slowly but surely steering the cosmic monster away from populated space. They chatted casually and joked with each other and took coffee breaks, and at one point, someone started playing music over the ship's internal speakers, and it sounded like they were having a party, rather than preventing galactic extinction. On the observation deck, the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council watched in complete silence, because words seemed inadequate for what they were witnessing. The impossible was happening before their eyes, and it was being carried out by a species that treated the whole thing as mundane and routine. I have a question, Vexthor finally said, and broke the long silence. Who is this Henderson person they keep mentioning? The Craftmaster consulted its data archive and began reading aloud. Pete Henderson, and human engineer, and born 2251 and died 2312 and credited with 17 major advances in gravitational manipulation and 32 safety violations, and the Henderson Protocol and the Henderson Incident, and being described as the most entertaining disaster waiting to happen that humanity ever produced. He sounds dangerously unqualified, Vexthor said. On the contrary, the Craftmaster replied. He held 12 advanced degrees and was considered the foremost expert in his field, but he was also apparently what humans call completely insane, and they named their black hole moving procedure after him. It seems to be a mark of respect in human culture to name dangerous procedures after the people who first survived attempting them. Vexthor felt his eye stalks drooping. Their culture makes my head hurt. Final adjustments complete, Helen's voice announced over the communication channel. The black hole has been successfully redirected, and new trajectory will take it safely through uninhabited space, and eventually out of the galaxy in approximately 15,000 years. That is it. Vexthor stood abruptly. It is over just like that. Yep, and pretty textbook operation actually. Carlos, secure the graviton arrays and let us pack it up and head home. Roger that, boss, and Carlos replied. Hey, is anyone else hungry, because I could murder a cheeseburger right now? It is almost dinner. Time back on Earth, so let us make for the gate and see if we can catch the evening mess. As the human ships began powering down their systems and preparing to depart the Galactic Council, representatives remained frozen in place, and they were trying to process what they had just witnessed. The humans had saved countless trillions of lives and prevented the destruction of galactic civilization, and now they were concerned about dinner. They saved countless trillions of lives, Krenak said slowly, and his voice was filled with disbelief, and they are concerned about getting dinner. Apparently so, the Craftmaster replied. Vexthor watched the Odyssey Dawn turn gracefully in space and begin moving toward the nearest jump gate. I need to speak with their commander immediately because I must understand how their minds work. The other representatives nodded in agreement, and they all felt the same confusion and curiosity about these strange beings who had just saved them, all while treating the whole thing like another day at work. The Galactic Council chamber had never been this loud before, and Ambassador Vexthor stood at the center of it all, trying to make sense of the chaos around him. His 6 limbs waved frantically as he pointed at the massive holographic display. Floating above the assembly floor, and every representative from every species present was staring at the same terrifying image. A black hole was moving through space, and it was heading directly toward the populated systems of the galaxy. And according to their best scientists, there was absolutely nothing anyone could do to stop it. The display showed 12 star systems that had already been consumed by the massive gravitational monster, and the projections were even worse because within 3 standard cycles, the black hole would reach the core worlds where trillions of beings lived and worked and raised their families. Vexthor felt his body temperature drop as he read the calculations again and again, hoping to find some error in the data. But there was none, because the math was perfect and the conclusion was unavoidable. All around him, the other species were reacting in their own ways to the news, and the Zephyrians were making high-pitched chirping sounds that indicated extreme distress, while the Moloth delegation had turned a pale gray color that their species only displayed when facing imminent death. Even the craftmaster, who belonged to a species known for their calm, logical approach to problems, had started backing away from the holographic projection, as if physical distance might somehow protect them from the cosmic threat bearing down on them all. Vexthor cleared his throat and spoke into the chamber's audio system, and his voice boomed across the assembly. "We must evacuate immediately and abandon our homeworlds because there is no other option available to us, and our greatest scientific minds have confirmed that we cannot fight this thing or slow it down or change its course. The only rational response is to flee and hope that we can find new worlds far enough away from this disaster to rebuild our civilizations." The other representatives nodded in agreement, and some were already accessing their communication devices to send orders back to their homeworlds, but then a sound cut through the panic, and it was the sound of someone eating. Vexthor turned his eye stalks toward the corner of the assembly where the human delegation sat, and what he saw made his brain struggle to process the information. Captain Jake Harrison was sitting with his feet propped up on the desk in front of him, and he was casually eating what appeared to be some kind of sandwich wrapped in a thin material. Next to him sat Dr. Lisa Murphy, who was scrolling through data on her tablet computer and occasionally taking sips from a container that had words printed on it in human language. Neither of them seemed concerned about the black hole or the impending destruction of galactic civilization or anything else that was happening in the chamber. Vexthor felt anger rising in his chest along with confusion, because how could any species be this calm when facing total extinction? "Excuse me," but he said loudly, and directed his attention fully at the humans. "But do your people not understand the severity of this situation, because your entire species faces extinction, and you are sitting there eating lunch?" His voice carried across the chamber, and suddenly everyone was looking at the human delegation. Jake finished chewing his food before responding, and when he spoke, his tone was relaxed and almost casual. "Yeah, we heard you talking about the black hole in the 3 days until everyone dies and all that standard Tuesday stuff, really." He gestured with his sandwich toward Vexthor and continued speaking. "You want a bite of this because it is peanut butter and jelly, which is what we call comfort food." The entire assembly fell into stunned silence, and nobody moved or spoke for several long seconds because the aliens could not understand what they were hearing. Lisa looked up from her tablet and spoke to Jake without any concern in her voice. "Actually, Captain, it is Wednesday today." Jake nodded and swung his feet down from the desk. "Right, so Wednesday, which means technically this crisis is below average for severity compared to what we usually deal with." He stood up and brushed some crumbs off his uniform before turning his attention back to the assembly. "All right, Doc, what are we looking at here with this black hole situation?" Lisa tapped a few buttons on her tablet, and suddenly her display projected into the center of the chamber, and it overlaid the Council's existing hologram with new data. Black hole of approximately 15 solar masses and moving at 0.73 light speed, on a trajectory that will intersect with 73 inhabited systems over the next standard month, and current distance is 12 light years from the nearest populated world. One of the Zephyrian representatives spoke up, and its voice carried a tiny bit of hope. "Can it be destroyed somehow, because maybe there is a weapon or technology that could eliminate the threat?" Lisa shook her head. "Destroyed, no, because black holes do not really work that way, and you cannot just blow them up with weapons, but moved absolutely. Yes, we can move it." The chamber erupted again, but this time it was confusion instead of fear, and aliens were shouting questions at each other and at the humans. Vexthor's voice climbed several octaves as he demanded an explanation. "You cannot move a black hole, because that is completely impossible, and it violates every known principle of physics that we understand." Jake shrugged his shoulders in a very human gesture. "I mean, we have done it before, actually, and there was the Henderson incident back in 2287, which you might not know about." "The what incident?" Vexthor demanded. Jake explained while Lisa continued working on her tablet. "Long story, but there was this guy named Pete Henderson who thought it would be funny to see if we could play billiards with stellar objects, and it turned out we could do exactly that. made a real mess of the Kepler 4842 system, but we fixed it eventually and learned a lot in the process. Lisa nodded in agreement. We have refined the technique since then, and it is actually standard protocol now for this kind of situation. We move about 3 to 5 black holes per year for various infrastructure projects because they are quite useful for power generation if you position them correctly. The Galactic Council members looked at each other, and their various faces showed universal bewilderment and shock. The Craftmaster spoke up, and its translator barely managed to convey the emotion in its voice. You move black holes for infrastructure purposes. Sure, Jake said, as if this was the most normal thing in the universe. How else would you do it really, in any way? Just give us about 6 hours to run the calculations, and we will get a crew together to handle this situation. Should have everything wrapped up before the weekend arrives. 6 hours, Vexthor repeated, and then he collapsed into his seat because his legs could not support him anymore. Our finest computational systems have been working on this problem for 17 cycles and found nothing but dead ends and impossibilities. Yeah, well, Jake said with a grin on his face, and you probably were not approaching it from the right angle or using the right methods. Lisa, call up the engineering team back on the ship and let them know we need them for this job. Let us get this show on the road. The humans began making preparations with an efficiency that seemed almost casual, and they were sending messages and checking data and discussing technical details while the rest of the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. They could only watch as this species treated a cosmic catastrophe with the same energy and attention that most beings reserved for routine maintenance tasks. Vexthor turned to his aide who stood nearby. I want a complete psychological profile of humans, and I want it immediately because we need to understand how their minds work. Yes, Ambassador. And should I mark the request as urgent? His aide asked. Vexthor watched Jake Harrison laugh at something on his communicator, while simultaneously authorizing what appeared to be the deployment of several massive spacecraft. Mark it as critical, because I have a feeling we are going to need to understand these creatures if we are to maintain our sanity in the future, and they seem to be the only ones who are not panicking right now. As the human delegation continued their preparations, the other species could only watch and wonder what kind of civilization could face extinction with such calm confidence and treat moving a black hole as just another task to complete before the weekend. 3 weeks had passed since the black hole incident, and the Galactic Council convened another emergency session, but this time the panic was not coming from the Council members themselves because it was directed at them by the humans. Admiral Danny Scott stood before the assembly, and his expression was grave in a way that made Vexthor's blood run cold because in the weeks since meeting, Commander Foster, the ambassador, had learned to read human expressions, and this one said something was genuinely wrong. Ladies and gentlemen and honored representatives of all other designations, Danny began, and his voice carried the weight of serious concern. We have a problem, and it is a big one. The council chamber, which had been filled with the usual pre-session chatter, fell completely silent, and everyone turned their attention to the human admiral. Vexthor felt a knot forming in his stomach because if humans thought something was a problem, then it must be truly catastrophic. 17 hours ago, our deep space monitoring network detected an anomaly in Sector 447, and what we found there represents a clear and present danger to every species in this galaxy. Danny gestured, and a holographic display materialized above the assembly floor, showing a region of space that appeared normal at first glance. Then the image zoomed in and revealed something that made even the humans in the room shift uncomfortably. Is that a ship? Vexthor asked, and his eye stalks focused on the massive structure. Floating in space, not exactly, Danny replied. It is a factory, and specifically a self-replicating, automated factory, and based on the technology signatures, it is about 15 million years old, and it has been dormant this whole time until now. Dr. Sophie Bennett, who was the head of the Human Xenoarchaeology Division, stepped forward. We believe this is a remnant of the progenitor civilization, and the same species that built the jump gates we all use for faster-than-light travel, the same civilization that mysteriously vanished without a trace millions of years ago. And it has awakened, the Craftmaster asked, and its usual calm demeanor was cracking slightly. Yes, and it is doing what it was designed to do, which is replicate itself. Sophie brought up new data on the display. We estimate that at its current rate of production, it will have consumed every available resource in 3 star systems within 6 months, and Within a year, it will spread to 20 systems, and within 5 years, the entire galaxy will be consumed. The council erupted in panic just as Danny had expected, and aliens were shouting and gesturing wildly, and some were already trying to leave the chamber. Danny waited for the noise to die down before he continued speaking, and his face was still serious. Here is the worst news, and we cannot shut it down. What do you mean you cannot shut it down? Vexthor demanded, and his voice was several octaves higher than normal. You moved a black hole 3 weeks ago. Different problem, Sophie explained calmly. The factory is protected by technology we barely understand, and it has adaptive shielding that regenerates faster than we can damage it, and repair systems that can rebuild from a single remaining component, and a distributed intelligence system that learns from every attack we throw at it. We have run 17 different combat scenarios, and in every single one the factory wins. Then we are doomed, Krenak whispered, and his skin had gone that pale gray color again. Well, Danny said, and his expression shifted slightly into something that looked almost like a smile. I would not say doomed exactly. Vexthor recognized that look because he had seen it on Commander Foster's face right before she moved the black hole. What are you planning, Admiral? We cannot destroy it, and we cannot shut it down, but we might be able to reprogram it. Danny said it like it was the most obvious solution in the world. Reprogram a 15-million-year-old progenitor factory. The Craftmaster's skepticism was evident in its voice. The progenitors were millions of years more advanced than any current species, and their technology might as well be magic to us. Yeah, about that. And Danny gestured. A new hologram appeared, showing a young woman with her hair tied back and wearing what appeared to be civilian clothes covered in grease stains. This is Nicole Hayes, and she is a maintenance technician from the colony on Kepler 62F. Show them what you found, Nicole. The hologram shifted to show what appeared to be a control panel covered in strange symbols, and Nicole's voice came through as a recording. So I was fixing the waste reclamation system in Hab 7 when I noticed something weird about the junction box, and the symbols on it matched some graffiti I had seen on an old progenitor gate hub. Graffiti? Vexthor interrupted the recording. Danny paused it and nodded. Yeah, it turns out the progenitors had teenagers, too, or the equivalent of teenagers, and those teenagers apparently tagged public structures with the ancient alien equivalent of Zix was here in crude drawings. You are joking. Nope, and completely serious, Danny continued. Nicole's discovery led us to realize something important, which is that the progenitors were not incomprehensible alien gods, but they were just people who happened to have really good technology, and people, no matter how advanced, still do things. Sophie took over the explanation. We started looking at progenitor sites with fresh eyes, and instead of treating everything as sacred and mysterious, we approached it like we would any archaeological site on Earth. And you know what? We found what the Craftmaster asked and leaned forward with. Interest instruction manual, Sophie said, simply. The council chamber erupted again, and this time it was in disbelief rather than panic, because nobody could believe what they were hearing. The progenitors left instruction manuals. Vexthor could not process this information. Everywhere, Sophie confirmed. Carved into walls and embedded in data crystals, and even encoded in the structure of the gates themselves, and we just never thought to look for them because everyone assumed a species that advanced would not need something as mundane as instructions. But humans looked, the Craftmaster said slowly. Of course we did, and Sophie smiled. Have you ever tried to assemble furniture without instructions? Because it is a nightmare. We figured even super advanced aliens probably felt the same way about complicated equipment. Danny restarted the presentation. Long story short, we think we can reprogram the factory, but it is going to be dangerous. The facility is actively hostile to unauthorized entry, and even with the manuals, we are essentially trying to hotwire a machine we do not fully understand, and you need volunteers, Vexthor stated. Actually, no, and we already have a team ready to go. Danny gestured to himself. I'm leading it personally along with Nicole and Sophie and a team of engineers who think this sounds like fun. Fun? Krenak repeated weakly. Yeah, I mean, how often do you get to reprogram a 15-million-year-old factory? Danny grinned widely. This is basically the coolest engineering challenge in galactic history. Over the next hour, Danny outlined the plan in detail, and it was risky and potentially suicidal and required a level of improvisation that made the alien representatives deeply uncomfortable. The humans, on the other hand, seemed energized by the whole thing and were practically bouncing with excitement. "We launch in 6 hours," Danny concluded. "We should have this wrapped up in about 3 days, assuming nothing goes catastrophically wrong." "And if something does go catastrophically wrong?" Vexthor asked. "Then we improvise because it is kind of our thing," Danny said confidently. As the briefing ended and the humans filed out of the chamber, they were chatting excitedly about the upcoming mission and discussing technical details and making jokes. Vexthor turned to the craftmaster with a bewildered expression on his face. "They are excited about this," he said. "A threat that could consume the galaxy, and they are excited. Humans thrive on challenge," the craftmaster observed. "I have been studying them extensively since the black hole incident, and do you know what they do for recreation?" "I'm afraid to ask," Vexthor replied. "They climb mountains and jump out of aircraft and race vehicles at dangerous speeds and dive to crushing ocean depths," the craftmaster continued. "They actively seek out activities that risk death purely for the enjoyment of overcoming that risk. That is insane. Perhaps it is the most sane response possible to living in a universe that is constantly trying to kill you." The craftmaster watched the humans through the viewport. Instead of hiding from danger, they master it. Vexthor watched as the human ships prepared to depart for their mission. "I hope you are right, craftmaster, because our survival depends on the most recklessly brave species in the galaxy succeeding at an impossible task." "Given their track record," the craftmaster replied, "I would say our odds are surprisingly good." The progenitor factory loomed before them like a massive crystalline spider, and its countless mechanical limbs were reaching out to harvest asteroids and stellar debris with terrifying efficiency. Each limb was the size of a small moon, and the central structure could have easily swallowed a planet whole, and Admiral Danny Scott studied it through the viewport of the USS Endeavour with genuine appreciation for the engineering involved. "That is one big machine," Danny said calmly. "Readings confirm it has been expanding since we first detected it," Lieutenant Ben Murphy reported from the sensor station. "It has built another 17 processing arms in just the last 12 hours. Right, so let us not give it time to build any more." Danny activated the ship-wide communication channel. "All teams, this is Admiral Scott, and we are going in. So remember your training, and trust your instincts, and if you find an instruction manual, actually read it before pushing random buttons." A chorus of acknowledgments came back through the speakers, along with a few chuckles and nervous laughter. Nicole Hayes' voice came through from the boarding shuttle. "Admiral, I'm reading the manual right now, and did you know the progenitors had a section on occupational safety because there is a whole chapter about proper lifting techniques?" "Seriously?" Danny asked. "Yeah, and apparently, even super advanced aliens got workplace injuries." Nicole sounded amused. "There is even a diagram showing the correct way to lift heavy quantum processing cores." Sophie Bennett's voice joined in from another shuttle. "This is actually fascinating from an anthropological perspective, because the progenitors were clearly a practical people. Everything is labeled, and there are warnings about electrical hazards, and I am pretty sure this symbol means break room." "A 15-million-year-old break room," Danny mused. "Wonder if there is still coffee in there." "Sir, we are approaching the entry point," the pilot announced. "All right, people, let us do this," and boarding teams launch when ready. 3 shuttles detached from the Endeavour and streaked toward the factory like tiny insects approaching a massive web. Almost immediately, the structure's defensive systems activated and energy beams lanced out through space, missing the shuttles by only a few meters as the pilots threw their craft into wild, evasive maneuvers. "Defensive systems are active," Ben called out from his station. "Same adaptive shielding we saw in the simulations." "Nicole, you are up," Danny said with complete confidence in his voice. From her shuttle, Nicole was already working on the problem. "On it, Admiral, and according to the manual, there should be a maintenance override frequency. It is designed to let repair crews through without getting shot at, and I just need to find the right frequency to broadcast energy." Beams continued to fill the space around the shuttles like a deadly light show, and one beam clipped the shields of the lead craft, sending it spinning wildly. Before the pilot regained control, "Any time now, Nicole," the pilot called out, and his voice was strained but steady. "Got it." Nicole transmitted a series of complex tones toward the factory. Instantly, all the defensive fire ceased completely, and the space around them became quiet and peaceful. The shuttles approached the massive structure without any further resistance and found docking ports that, despite 15 million years of dormancy still functioned perfectly, as if they had been maintained yesterday. Well, that was easy, Sophie commented as her shuttle docked. The manual literally had the override code written right in it, and the progenitors really did not want their maintenance workers to have a bad day at work. The boarding teams disembarked into corridors that were large enough to drive a truck through, and everything was pristine and functional. Lieutenant Kim Ryder, who was part of the engineering team, checked her instruments. Gravity is Earth normal and atmosphere is breathable, which is interesting. Danny led his team deeper into the structure, and they were following the directions from Nicole's translated manual through the maze of corridors and processing chambers and manufacturing bays that were all operating with terrifying efficiency. Contact, someone called out. Suddenly, a progenitor maintenance drone rounded the corner ahead of them, and it was roughly humanoid in shape, but built from a silvery metal that seemed to absorb light. For a moment, both the humans and the drone froze in place and stared at each other. Then Nicole quickly checked her manual. Wait, do not shoot because these things are not armed, and they are just maintenance robots. The drone made a sound that the universal translator struggled with and then projected a hologram that showed a symbol meaning unauthorized personnel. According to the manual, can you tell it we are authorized? Danny asked. Nicole consulted the manual and then spoke into her translator using specific progenitor phrases that she had learned. The drone's posture shifted from threatening to what might have been confused, and it made another sound. A new hologram appeared, and this time it showed what looked like a request for identification credentials. It wants our credentials, Sophie said, and she was fascinated by the whole interaction. Even 15 million years later, it is still following bureaucratic procedures. Can we fake credentials? Danny asked practically. Better than that, Nicole replied. She pulled out a small device she had built based on the manual's specifications. I can register us as a legitimate maintenance crew, and according to the protocols, any sapient species can apply for a maintenance license. The progenitors apparently believed in equal opportunity employment. She activated the device, and the drone stood perfectly still for several seconds while it processed the information. Then it made a cheerful-sounding beep and projected a hologram that clearly meant approved. Congratulations, everyone, Sophie said with a grin. We are now licensed progenitor maintenance workers. The drone now regarded them as colleagues rather than intruders, and it began leading them through the facility like a helpful tour guide. It even stopped at several points to show them important safety features and emergency systems and fire suppression equipment. This is surreal, Ben muttered as they walked. We are being given a safety tour by a 15-million-year-old robot, a very safety-conscious 15-million-year-old robot, Kim added as the drone paused. Again, to point out another fire extinguisher, they finally reached the central control room, which was a massive chamber filled with holographic displays and control interfaces that stretched up toward the ceiling. The drone gestured helpfully at the main console and made an encouraging beeping sound. Okay, Nicole said while studying the manual on her datapad. According to this, we need to access the primary directive subsystem and change the operational parameters, which should be straightforward. Can you do it? Danny asked. Should be easy, actually, and the manual has a whole section on updating factory parameters. Nicole approached the console. There is even a troubleshooting guide for common problems. Nicole began interfacing with the ancient console, and she was guided by the 15-million-year-old instructions that some practical progenitor engineer had written. The drone watched approvingly and occasionally made helpful beeping sounds like a supervisor checking on good work. Found it, Nicole announced after several minutes. Current directive is replicate and process available materials, and new directive options include standby mode and controlled production and specialized manufacturing. What is specialized manufacturing? Sophie asked curiously. Nicole scrolled through the options on the display. Looks like we can tell it to build specific things, and the progenitors use these factories to construct the jump gates and space stations and all kinds of infrastructure. Danny saw the opportunity immediately. So we could reprogram it to build useful things instead of consuming everything in sight. Exactly, and we could have it manufacture medical equipment and habitats and research stations and whatever we need. Nicole smiled. This thing is basically a giant 3D printer that can make anything. Do it and set it to controlled production mode. Specialize for infrastructure development, Danny ordered, and add a safety protocol that prevents it from expanding into inhabited systems. Nicole's fingers moved over the interface with increasing confidence as she input commands, while the maintenance drone observed like a proud teacher. After several minutes, she stepped back from the console. Done, and the factory will now produce infrastructure as requested by authorized species with strict expansion limits and environmental protections built in. The holographic displays around the room shifted and showed the factory's new operational parameters. The massive structure began powering down its aggressive expansion systems, and the mechanical arms that had been frantically harvesting materials slowed to a controlled pace. Back on the Council flagship, Vexthor watched the sensor readings change, and he could hardly believe what he was seeing. "They did it," he whispered. "They actually reprogrammed a progenitor factory." The craftmaster nodded slowly. Humans looked at an impossible problem and found the instruction manual. Danny's voice came through the communication channel, sounding relaxed and satisfied. "Mission accomplished, Council, and the factory is now under our control and set to produce useful infrastructure. We are heading back now because I promised the crew pizza when we finished." "Pizza?" Vexthor asked weakly. "It is Tuesday," Danny replied. "Pizza Tuesday is a tradition." As the human ships departed from the ancient factory, Vexthor turned to look at the other council members. "We need to accept something important, which is that humans are going to keep doing impossible things and treating them as normal." The craftmaster agreed. "The question is whether we can adapt to living in a galaxy where cosmic crises are just another Tuesday for humans." Kreenak, who had been silent, spoke up. "I think we have no choice but to adapt because humans have twice now saved us from extinction, and both times they were more concerned about their next meal than the danger." Vexthor watched the human vessels disappear toward the jump gate. "Then let us be grateful they are on our side, because I would not want to face humanity as an enemy." The council members nodded in agreement, and they all silently acknowledged that the galaxy had changed forever because now everyone knew that the most dangerous thing in the universe was not black holes or ancient machines, but rather a species that refused to accept the word impossible.